Alright, so today we are learning how to shade the sphere realistically in color. And we are going to start with the basics. We're going to start with the primary colors. So I'm going to write up in the left-hand corner, primary colors. Most people think of primary colors, you think of red, yellow, and blue, but I'm going to tell you the real scientific name in art for the colors. So when you go to a store and you want to find a premier pencil or a high-end paint or even some of the basic Liquitex paints, you will understand what you're buying when it says these names. So the first one is blue, but it's ultra marine blue. The next one is cadmium red, cadmium yellow. Now we are shading with black and white colored pencils, and the type of black and white that I like to use is titanium white, and Mars black. Okay, so I have my paper in landscape, just side to side, up and down is portrait. So the first thing I'm going to do to make sure that I'm using this space evenly is to grid my space. So I'm just going to divide it in half. Use a ruler if you want to. Eventually you get to the point to where you kind of just have spatial awareness and you understand how to divide space evenly. But it just takes practice, and that's one reason why we grid, is so that you can understand that. So I'm going to draw circles first, and then we are going to get into shading them. So the first circle, next circle, I draw very lightly at first. That way if I do mess up, it's easier to erase. It's kind of wonky right there. Kind of a little bit wonky. You just go back over it until it looks right. I'm using a hard eraser, which just means that it's not very flexible. Erasing the lines I don't need, making it nice and round. And when I erase, I use a brush. You can use any type of brush. This is called a drafting brush. And it just makes sure that you do not make a mess when you're erasing. Now we're going to have a light source, so I'm going to do a little lamp shining on my object for each one of them. Just imagine your light source. And you start with just one light source to begin when you're trying to work from your imagination, making things look real. And then you get on to all types of other light. We do go over reflective light, so you'll see that. And speaking of which, that's going to be in your cast shadow. So this light is going to be on the sphere creating a cast shadow. So I'm going to draw my cast shadow, the outline. Okay. All right. Just clean up my lines a little bit. There we go. Okay, so the first one I am going to do is blue. So I'm going to, just like I did in my realistic sphere, I'm going to start in the middle, which is the core. So that's where the light and the dark separate from each other. So that's the first thing I'm going to shade. I'm going to be generous with it because I'm going to be blending these later. So I want as much pigment on the paper as possible. And the middle is darker than anywhere else, so I'm really going to press down pretty hard, especially directly in the middle. Okay. Now as I move towards the light, it's going to get lighter, so I'm not going to press as hard. And remember, there is this spot where the light first hits it, and that's going to be our brightest spot, and that is called the highlight. So, now the other part of it is in shadow, but it's not quite as dark as our middle. So I'm not going to shade it as dark as the middle, but I am going to shade it pretty dark. Now that I've filled in all the areas that I want to fill in, I'm going to get a little bit closer to the light source. It's real. The highlights are just a small area of an object. There are usually not a lot of highlights. So the first thing I'm going to want to start with is the white. And I'm going to take the white, and I like to work in circles to blend. And I'm going to start blending it into my blue. You can see it's blending already. I'm going to stop before I get to the core. Now at the core is where the light and the dark separate. So I'm going to use black now, and I'm going to go directly in the middle of my core where the light and the dark separate. I also want to shade this area because it is in a shadow. It is away from the light, so I'm just not going to press as hard. But I am going to shade it in. And remember, this is lighter than the middle because you have light bouncing off of the surface onto the object. And what that also means is that color is going to be on the surface. So when light bounces, light is why we see color. So when it bounces off of this object, you're going to see some of that color on the surface. So I'm going to shade this in. And then remember, the cast shadow is as dark as your core. So I'm adding black to it. Now to finish it up, if you want to use a blending stump, you can use a blending stump, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So here's my blending stump. That's what these are called, blending stumps. You can use a Q-tip also. You don't have to have this. It works the same. So I'm going to start with the white on a clear surface on my blending stump. And I'm going to blend it in even more. This will make it nice and smooth. Now, I don't want to mix the white with the black because that will end up making gray, so I'm going to switch sides and I'm going to blend the black in, starting in the middle. And I'm going to blend the cast shadow together. Now the other thing you can do to blend it together is use Gamsol. So I buy it in bulk, especially as an art teacher. I have to have all my students use quite a bit of it, so I just get these little soup cups and then I pour a little bit in the soup cups. You just need a little bit at a time. I'm going to blend the white in first, and this is Gamsol. You can get this at, I think you can get this at some Walmarts. You can definitely get it at Michael's, definitely get it online. Hobby Lobby has it. it just picks up the pigment a little bit and moves it together. And it's one step away from actually painting. And I like to paint, so I like to use this. So really the only thing missing to make it paint, we have the pigment, we have the solvent, which is Gamsol, which is a liquid, and then the last thing to create paint is called a binder, which is like a sticky substance. In the Renaissance, early Renaissance era, the 1400s, they used egg yolk, which is why you see all those crackling effects on old paintings. And then eventually they moved into oil paint towards Da Vinci, 1500s, Michelangelo. Though Michelangelo didn't really like painting very much, he liked to sculpt. It just blends it nicely together. Now the other cool thing about, now that this surface is wet, if I wanted to push the color even more, I can go back in while the surface is wet and add more pigment, just to make it a little bit richer in color. And you can work on the surface while it's wet with the color pencils, and it blends it together. It's a pretty cool effect. And it's the same process. I lighten it as it's getting closer to the highlight. Side. And then cast shadow. I go back in with my white. Really get in there and blend it together. Makes it nice and rich. And then I can go back in with some Gamsol and blend it even more. Gives you that nice even blend. I stop before I get to the black because I don't want the white and the black to mix together. I want it to be pure pigment, which is ultramarine blue. Now you have a realistic sphere. So you continue the process, yellow, red, black and white. And then when you're done, you will end up with something like this.